Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this Open for Questions session on the President's vision on the way forward in Afghanistan. My name is Karen Richardson with the White House Office of Public Engagement. Joining me here at the White House today are Ben Rhodes, who is the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications, as well as Brian Deese, who is the Deputy Director for the National Economic Council. Last week, the President delivered an address on implementing his strategy to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, as well as his plan to focus on key investments here at home. We will be taking your questions live on Facebook throughout the duration of the conversation. However, I think that we will go ahead and start with a few questions that were submitted previously on Facebook, on our White House Facebook page, as well as on whitehouse.gov. The first question is from Jay from Dayton, Ohio. Question, this is for you, Ben. Would you clearly and specifically state our mission objective in both Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Sure. Thanks, Jay. It's the most important question in many respects. The President has been very clear that we have a focused goal in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that is to deny al-Qaeda a safe haven, full stop. The reason we went into Afghanistan after 9/11 was so that al-Qaeda would never have the opportunity to plan attacks against the United States as it did before 9/11. And so the goal that we set when the President came into office, that he reaffirmed in his West Point speech in December of 2009, was to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda in both Afghanistan and Pakistan, and to deny them the ability to threaten the United States from either of those two countries again. We've made a good deal of progress against that core objective since the President's been in office. In the 18 months alone since he ordered the additional resources into Afghanistan at West Point in December, we have taken out over half of al-Qaeda's top 30 leadership. That, of course, includes Osama bin Laden, the only leader that al-Qaeda has ever known. So we are doing a very effective work with both Pakistan and Afghanistan to take out al-Qaeda, to deny them that safe haven. The President also, however, set a series of objectives in Afghanistan that are necessary to meet the goal of denying a safe haven. So the reason that he ordered additional resources into Afghanistan in December of 2009 is because the Taliban was had the momentum in Afghanistan. And what we feared was a situation where the Taliban was returning to power, was controlling more and more of the country, and therefore al-Qaeda would be able to reestablish the type of safe haven in Afghanistan that they had before 9/11. So the President said we need to break the momentum of the Taliban, push them back out of their strongholds, and train up Afghan national security forces so that they can provide for their own security going forward. And that's exactly what we've done over the course of the last year and a half. The Taliban's been pushed out of Helmand province, Kandahar province in southern Afghanistan, their traditional strongholds, and we've trained over 100,000 Afghan security forces. So when you look at those objectives, in the effort to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda, and remove its leadership, to break the Taliban's momentum, and to train up Afghan security forces, we are well on target of achieving our core goal that I spoke of, which is denying a safe haven for al-Qaeda in that region. And therefore, we can pursue the type of aggressive troop reductions that the President outlined. 10,000 troops by the end of this year, 33,000 troops by next summer, and additional reductions going forward. We can pursue those troop reductions while being certain that we're making progress against that core goal of denying al-Qaeda a safe haven.
Thank you, Ben. The next question will be from Sally Jo from Pontiac, Michigan. She says, thinking it's wonderful to see our troops back home. We need our young people back for creativity, building up the economy, their zeal for life, etc. Can we bring back some manufacturing that was outsourced? That's for you, Brian.
Great. Sally Jo, it's a very good question, and being from Michigan, you know quite well the role that manufacturing plays and our manufacturing base plays, not only in our economy's competitiveness, but in the basic vibrancy of so many communities across the industrial Midwest and in fact across our entire country. The President actually is out today in Iowa visiting a manufacturing facility there and has for most of the month of June been traveling across the country to see firsthand what's happening in our manufacturing base and get a better sense of how we can move our manufacturing base forward. He started the month actually at a Chrysler facility in Ohio, where he was able to announce that Chrysler has fully paid back its outstanding loans to the U.S. government, which is an example of how a tough decision that the president made back 2 years ago to stand behind the American auto industry is starting to pay off in terms of retaining and increasing those jobs that you were talking about in manufacturing facilities here in the U.S. Going forward, we have an aggressive agenda to try to make the United States the cutting-edge place in the world for high-tech manufacturing and for value-added manufacturing that will not only create jobs here, but create spillover innovations that will help spur new industries, spur small businesses that rely on our manufacturing base. The types of things we need to focus on are the types of things the president has outlined this month. Figuring out how to better train our workers and connect our workers to the actual employers, the manufacturers themselves, to make sure that they're not just getting trained, but they're getting trained for jobs that exist, and we can make that transition seamlessly. Providing more tax incentives for companies to choose to locate their new factories and locate their new facilities here in the United States, particularly in growing industries like clean energy, where we see growth of the industry globally, but we are in a real race across the globe about whether those new facilities and those new jobs will be created here in the United States or not. We've seen some success over the last 2 years in attracting more investment to the United States. We're in a period now for the first time in over a decade where our manufacturing sector is actually expanding and adding jobs, but we've got to build to that momentum, and that's something we're really focused on right now.
Thank you, Brian. We're getting a lot of questions about troop numbers. One being, how many American troops will stay in Afghanistan after 2012?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's important to look at both the big picture of U.S. troops serving in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and then specifically Afghanistan, which was the precise question that was asked. When we took office, there were roughly 150,000 U.S. troops serving in Iraq, and there are 30,000 troops serving in Afghanistan, 180,000 total troops. We've removed 100,000 troops from Iraq and are on our way down to having no troops in Iraq by the end of this year. So even with the increases in troops that the president ordered into Afghanistan earlier in his administration, we've actually come down by roughly 30,000 troops in terms of the total number of U.S. troops serving in harm's way in both Iraq and Afghanistan. With regard to Afghanistan specifically, when the president made his announcement the other night, we had roughly 101,000 troops serving in Afghanistan. As he said, he'll take out 10,000 of those troops by the end of this year. Then there will be 33,000 total troops removed from Afghanistan by next summer. So next summer, we should be at a position where we're back down to about 68,000 troops serving in Afghanistan. The president, however, also said that he would continue reductions at a steady pace beyond next summer. So it's not as if we're going to remove these 33,000 troops and then stop the troop reductions. This is simply an initial phase of a drawdown that is going to continue. So we'll be down to 68,000, but then we'll be coming down at a steady pace beyond that going forward. So I think when we look at the big picture, we will have gone from roughly 180,000 troops serving in Iraq and Afghanistan when the president took office, down to, again, under 70,000 troops serving in both those places next summer, given the planned reductions in Iraq and the planned reductions in Afghanistan. And we'll keep going forward beyond that. So I think the important point here is we're winding down the two wars. Iraq is closer to being concluded, and now Afghanistan is on a trajectory of coming downward and winding down the war as well. But not only are we doing that, we're winding down the two wars from a position of strength, and that in Iraq we've transitioned to Iraqi responsibility for security, and in Afghanistan and Pakistan we've dealt serious blows against al-Qaeda. So I think we can have confidence that we're both ending the wars, but doing so in a way that's going to keep the United States safe, and it's going to accomplish the core objective of why we went into Afghanistan in the first place, which is to bring those responsible for 9/11 to justice and to prevent them from ever having a safe haven to attack us from again.
Thanks, Ben. The next question is, do you think there will be a permanent humanitarian military base in Afghanistan? If so, how many troops will need there to maintain the base?
It's a good question. What we've agreed to with the Afghan government is that we are going to begin and have begun a process of transition to them. So that currently, heading into this year, the United States and our allies and partners were providing and responsible for security in much of the country. Now what's begun is a process in which we are transitioning different provinces and municipalities in Afghanistan to the Afghan government. The window for that transition to take place begins again this year, and it concludes in 2014. So over the course of that intervening period, we'll be steadily handing over responsibility for security from the international security force that's in Afghanistan to the Afghan government. While we're handing over that and transitioning that responsibility to the Afghans, we'll be steadily reducing our troop numbers as well. That said, the Afghans will be in full lead responsibility for their security in 2014, quite similar to the type of process that we've undergone in Iraq. We've also said that we're going to discuss with the Afghan government what type of support they will need from the international community going forward. And the areas that we are talking to them about providing that support wouldn't include continued combat operations and continued responsibility for security to the United States or to NATO, but rather a support role. So we could continue to provide them with advice and training for their security forces going forward. And we might need to have the ability to conduct counterterrorism operations should we continue to see a terrorist threat coming from that part of the world. So it's a far more limited type of presence than the one that we have today. It wouldn't be permanent. It would just be to continue the type of training and advice that can help the Afghan security forces once they're fully in the lead, and that can make sure that we can protect ourselves through counterterrorism operations if we need to beyond 2014. In terms of the number, this would be a dramatically lower number than the number of troops we have there today. It would be lower, certainly, than the number of troops when the president took office. So we are talking, in the several thousands and not in the tens of thousands, as is the case today. But this is something that we're in discussions with the Afghan government about. It's not just the United States in those discussions, it's NATO, our alliance, and that's the type of thing that we'll be working out between now and the time when the transition is fully complete to Afghan responsibility for their security.
Great, thank you, Ben. The next question is from Annette from Memphis. We are in desperate need of infrastructure building and repair. Does the president have any plans to work on these issues which will not only help America, but will put people to work? I think you addressed a little bit of this before, but you can address it again a little bit.
Sure. And the issue of infrastructure is one that the president hears a lot about as he travels around the country, the vice president as well. I think it's an issue that is important both for individual communities as well as our national economy. For individual communities, infrastructure is often the difference between whether or not they can, attract a new business to come and invest in their hometown because they can offer better roads, better access to distribution networks. And for our national economy, in a global race for talent and a global race for the jobs and investments of the future, we need to put ourselves forward as a leader, both in physical infrastructure, from our ports to our rails, to our highway system, as well as the new 21st century infrastructure, broadband and wireless networks across the country as well. So the president, starting really with the Recovery Act when we came into it, when he came into office, but also most recently in his last State of the Union, outlined a very broad-reaching plan for how to put the United States back in the lead in terms of having the best infrastructure. A couple of specific components, which Annette, for you may actually be the most relevant. The first is the president has talked about creating a new infrastructure fund. Some people call it an infrastructure bank. And the basic idea of this is simple, is to say, rather than going through and funding infrastructure the traditional way where you fund it by a formula and you fund roads and bridges and others without any accord to their economic significance, let's create a fund that says, let's prioritize what are the projects that are going to have the most regional or national economic significance in terms of attracting investment, in terms of attracting jobs. And then let's fund them not just with government funds, but let's leverage in private dollars so that we are getting more bang for the buck for every taxpayer dollar while also investing in these priority projects. That's an idea that has bipartisan support. There are proposals actually in front of Congress right now, and we're hopeful that we can get something done. Another idea that the president put forward is a national wireless initiative. It sounds like a simple idea, but if we were able to actually extend the equivalent of 4G wireless service to 98% of this country, we would unleash a huge amount of economic opportunity. And the president traveled out to Michigan a few months back to a small town where he actually saw what happened to this town, where they extended wireless and all of a sudden there were new entrepreneurs who were using the internet in ways that they hadn't before. They were able to connect their community college to their schools to better educate their children. There's really a huge opportunity, and so by auctioning off spectrum that the government owns, we can help unleash private investment and have a better virtual infrastructure as well. So infrastructure is a real priority for us. There's no question in a challenging budget environment, we have to use every single taxpayer dollar extremely effectively. But these types of targeted infrastructure investments, like a bank to leverage private dollars or a national wireless initiative, make a lot of sense and are things that we think we need to prioritize.
Thank you. We have a couple similar questions. One from Mary from Massachusetts, asking about the role of women. More specifically, what steps is the administration taking to ensure that Afghan women's rights are not bargained away in the reconciliation process? And also, similarly from Dilsek, I believe her name is, from Facebook, she asked, are women at the table in this process as well?
Yeah. Well, it's an important question. I think we all remember that before 9/11, when the Taliban ran the country, women were brutally repressed in Afghanistan. Were not afforded opportunities that they are in just about every other country around the world. We also know that countries that provide rights to women are more successful. They're more likely to be prosperous, they're more likely to be democratic, and they're less likely to have the kind of tensions that we've seen in conflict-ridden zones of the world. So with regard to the reconciliation process, the United States has said that we want to participate in Afghan-led reconciliation, that if the Afghans reconcile, if the Taliban, for instance, is willing to meet a set of conditions, we're open to pursuing a political process that can help end the conflict in Afghanistan. That said, we've laid forth three very clear conditions for how the United States would approach these talks. First, the Taliban would have to renounce violence, essentially lay down their arms. Second, they'd have to break from al-Qaeda so that they don't have any connections to al-Qaeda and international terrorism. But third, and this is what relates to your question, they'd have to abide by Afghanistan's constitution. And the reason that's important is the Afghans built into their constitution a set of rights for women and protections for women, so that therefore, if those who are coming back into the fold and re-entering Afghan society, if they abide by those laws and that constitution, they'll have to respect a set of basic human rights for Afghan women. So that condition is the one that ensures that through the reconciliation process, nobody is bargaining away the very hard-fought and hard-earned rights that women have gotten in Afghanistan. Second, the Afghan government has gone out of its way, in certain provinces in particular, to try to extend opportunities to women. And a lot of the work that we've done and that NGOs, non-governmental organizations, have done in Afghanistan have gotten behind things like girls' education or integrating women into Afghan institutions like the Afghan army and local governance and national governance. And so we believe that we're going to continue to work with the Afghan government to provide additional opportunities for women, to make sure that girls have, again, the ability to get an education in parts of Afghanistan and are being more integrated into Afghan government. And that's not just our initiative. The Afghan government itself has taken that initiative in many places and is quite proud of some of the progress that's been made. There's a long way to go for Afghan women, They started from a place of great repression under the Taliban. But we are not going to, in any reconciliation process, bargain away the rights of Afghan women. In fact, we're going to protect them by standing up for the women's rights protections that are in the Constitution. And we're going to continue to encourage the type of initiatives that we've seen in parts of Afghanistan that extend the right to an education to women and that bring women into the fold, both because it's the right thing to do, but also because, as I said, those societies that allow women to have a greater role and have a greater voice have proven to be less prone to conflict and have proven to grow at greater rates economically than those societies that repress over 50% of their population.
Thank you, Ben. There's another question from Lucas on Facebook, wanting to know what role the State Department plays in the Obama administration strategy and policy formulation process.
Well, I'd say a couple things. As it relates to Afghanistan and Pakistan, the State Department plays an increasingly important role. And it's somewhat tied to the previous question, but currently we have a policy in Afghanistan that has a very large military component, of course. But as we are ramping down our military effort and drawing down our troops, our diplomacy is going to become even more important. So the State Department already is on the ground trying to work with the Afghan government to strengthen its capacity to stand up for its own future. They're both training security forces, our military is, but our State Department is also working with the Afghan government to make sure that they have a better capability to provide for their people. So the State Department will continue that effort of Afghan capacity building, but they'll also be a part of this diplomatic effort aimed at trying to reconcile different Afghan factions. That will include Afghans reconciling with Afghans. So those Taliban, again, who are willing to meet the conditions I spoke about, perhaps coming back into the fold if they're willing, again, to break with al-Qaeda, lay down their arms, and respect the laws of Afghanistan. But also to look at the region and how can we foster greater regional stability, better relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and a better regional framework for security going forward. Because what we've seen is if the countries in the region will buy into a compact and a consensus for how to move forward in a way that disempowers extremist groups and that fosters greater ties between the nations of the region, we'll be able to sustain the progress that that has been made not just in countering terrorism in the region, but trying to turn the page to a period of greater peace and expanded prosperity for the people of the region. So the State Department is very engaged in those efforts, both within Afghanistan and also within the region, to move beyond this period of war and to build a more durable peace. And in general, around the world, I think the State Department is actively involved in everything that we do as it relates to both resolving conflicts and trying to take advantage of different opportunities that we see, for instance, in the Arab world, where people are standing up for their own rights, and we're trying to support those democratic movements across the Arab world. So on a daily basis, what we see, particularly as we wind down the two wars, is the State Department playing a very aggressive role in standing up for America's interests, resolving conflicts, building the capacity of our partners, and trying to bring about a world that has a greater expansion of democracy and the stability that comes with it, and that shrinks the space in which extremists have been able to capitalize in the recent years.
Thank you, Ben. Our next question is from Lloyd from Massachusetts, who asks, I'd like to know how much money will be saved from the drawdown and what the administration's specific priorities and strategies are for investing that capital at home.
Sure. Well, I'll start, and then Brian can pick up where I left off. You know, the president spoke about this in his remarks the other night, and he spoke about the cost of war. And of course, the cost of war is paid above all by the men and women who fight the wars and their families. And we've had great sacrifice over the last 10 years. There's also a great economic cost that comes with the wars as well. $1 trillion, roughly, has been spent in Iraq and Afghanistan over the course of the last decade. Most of that was under the previous administration. But these wars come with a hefty price tag. At the peak of its highest level of commitment, the Iraq war came with roughly $120 billion a year. That's down dramatically since we've undertaken our drawdown in Iraq. And similarly in Afghanistan, I think we'll see a steady reduction in costs. With each roughly 10,000 or so troops that come out of Afghanistan, we are spending several $billions less a year. So as we're gradually ramping down our troop presence, we're going to see that total cost come down. And if you combine it with Iraq too, and the savings that we've already had from our troop reductions in Iraq, we are going to be spending dramatically less money abroad in these two wars than we have been in previous years. So that's a big part of how we're going to be addressing our long-term fiscal health, but we're also, as the President said, going to be able to take those resources and reinvest them at home so that we're focusing on nation building here at home and not simply investing those resources in wars abroad. But Brian can speak to some of those priorities.
Sure, and Lloyd, the question that you ask is a really important one, and just to pick up on what Ben said, the President has laid out a pretty comprehensive framework for how to deal with the legacy of debt and deficit that this country now faces as a result of a whole set of choices that have been made over the last several years, including the choices that led to investing the $1 trillion in these wars abroad, but also choices around passing tax cuts without paying for them, passing entitlement programs, some of which make some sense for our country, but without having the discipline of paying for them. All of those choices together have put us in a place where we face a very serious challenge over the long term in terms of living within our means and getting down our debt and deficits. The President's vision on that is guided by a couple basic principles. And the first one really goes to your question, which is we must have an approach that equally shares the sacrifice across all areas of our budget. And so that means that Pentagon spending does need to be part of this solution. We need to do it responsibly, we need to do it consistent with our national security priorities, but over the long term we need to put our spending on a more sustainable path. It also means looking across other areas of the budget too. The President's plan would bring domestic discretionary spending, that's spending outside of defense and outside of programs like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, down to its lowest level since President Eisenhower was in office. The President believes we can and we should make additional responsible changes to strengthen Medicare, to strengthen Medicaid. All of those can be part of this solution. And it will absolutely need to be the solution that we're going to need to ask the wealthiest among us, as well as companies in this country, some companies in this country, to pay modestly higher taxes going forward. The revenue portion has to be part of this as well, and that's consistent with the President's vision here. In addition to that, I would say that the President's view on how to reduce the deficit and reprioritize these resources, he feels strongly it also has to be consistent with our values. So as we look across all of these budget categories, as we make difficult choices to rein in our debt and deficit, we have to be willing to say what we value. And at base, the budgeting exercise is a question of what we as a country value. And that's why the questions that we've heard today and the discussion about Afghanistan really is linked up to discussions about our infrastructure here in the United States, whether we're going to have a strong manufacturing base. Because if you believe that we need to be investing in those areas, then you need to be willing to show that you can do so consistent with a responsible budget framework. And so that's what the President has tried to outline. And that is a big part of the linkage between our foreign policy and our imperative to rebuild here at home.
Thank you. I'm going to pull a couple from Facebook and combine them because there's similar questions coming in. Mike Lee from Facebook, Michael from Newark, they're asking really what our plans are to take care of our soldiers when they come home. More specifically, what will be done to address the needs of our soldiers in terms of employment upon their return to the States? Can President and Congress create legislation that will help them? And then a very similar question from Facebook. Another one is about what we're going to do to ensure they receive proper medical care, psychological care, and really help them reintegrate into society when they come.
Yeah, it's a very important question. The President has said he is committed to ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan responsibly. And part of ending the wars responsibly is caring for those who fought for them. In the course of the last 10 years, this generation of service members and their families have borne an incredible burden, multiple tours of duty in very difficult wars at a time when they knew they'd be sent into harm's way. So we have a commitment, as the President said in his speech the other night, to make sure we're caring for those who fought these wars and for their families. And we're doing that in several ways. First of all, we've already dramatically increased the amount of funding that we provide for our veterans so that we're making sure that they have the care and the benefits that they've earned. And we're working to bring the VA system into the 21st century so people get more effective and efficient care in terms of both their health care and receiving their claims and benefits. Associated with giving people the world-class care they deserve is dealing with some of the signature wounds of these wars, which are traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. We've had troops, again, serving multiple tours in very stressful environments, and there has been quite a toll paid in terms of mental health problems for those who are returning back into society. So we want to make sure that we're providing those troops who've been physically wounded with the care they need, but that we're also caring for those soldiers who are carrying around those unseen burdens of having been deployed in multiple tours of combat duty. And the President's provided additional resources to this. We've worked with the different branches of our services to make sure that we're reducing the stigma for people seeking care for those mental health wounds. And we're trying to create, again, a national sense of commitment to dealing with those signature wounds of this war. Associated with that, though, is one question in particular that was raised, which is how are we helping our soldiers, our troops, get the opportunities that they've earned? We want to make sure, as the President said, that our troops, when they leave the uniformed services, have the ability to help rebuild our nation here at home. And we're doing that in several ways. First of all, the President is implementing the 21st Century GI Bill. And what this does is it helps all of our service members and their families get a college education, if they so choose, when they leave the military service. And that's the most important thing that we can do in many respects in helping ensure that they're going to be able to get the jobs of the future. Just as our World War II generation, the greatest generation, ended up being the backbone of the American middle class in the 1950s that built really the American economy that served as an engine of global growth in the 20th century. We want to make sure that this generation of veterans, again, is becoming the middle class of the future here and is fueling economic growth at home as well. So we're providing those educational opportunities for our service members when they leave the military. Similarly, we're working with different companies across the country to make sure that there are specific programs that help recruit and seek out our veterans for employment. Because what we've seen is our troops have tremendous leadership skills. They've obviously, in many respects, led men and women in combat. They've dealt with very complex situations. They've developed skill sets in the military that can be very relevant to their post-military employment. And we want to make sure that we're going the extra mile with the private sector and with foundations to try to connect veterans with employment opportunities. This is something that the First Lady's worked on in some of her military families outreach, and that the President hears from our veterans about frequently, is how can we connect the private sector with those who are leaving the military service. So again, we're committed to making sure that we're providing veterans with the care and the benefits that they deserve, and that we're also opening up those doors of opportunity for them so that they can continue to serve and contribute to American society and the American economy when they choose to leave the uniformed services.
Thank you, and I think we'll take our last and final questions. This is from Atik. I apologize in advance for mispronouncing your name, who want you to speak to the stability in the region following withdrawal. And also Elizabeth, who wants to know what will the administration do, what is the administration going to do about the continuing threat of Pakistan? So they're both related questions.
Related questions, yeah. I think the President spoke about this in his remarks the other night. And the core point that he made is, in Afghanistan, as in Iraq, we have to recognize that it's not going to be the responsibility of the United States to provide security in the long run. It has to be the responsibility of these governments. It wasn't our goal in going into either Iraq or Afghanistan to keep large armies there indefinitely. We don't have any inherent national interest in having large numbers of troops deployed abroad indefinitely. We went there for a specific purpose, particularly in Afghanistan. We went there to deny a safe haven for al-Qaeda. And so what we want to do going forward is we want to make sure that we're training an Afghan security force that can stand on its own 2 feet, that can defend the country against the Taliban, that can deny safe haven to groups like Al-Qaeda. So in terms of regional stability, a key part of it is undertaking our efforts to defeat Al-Qaeda and take out its leadership, but also to train up an Afghan security force that can stand on its own 2 feet, defend its own country, support an Afghan government that is sovereign and capable of governing and sustaining itself. Secondly, we need to work with Pakistan as well, because as you know, a big part of the Al-Qaeda safe haven moved into Pakistan. And a lot of the success we've had in taking out Al-Qaeda leaders would not have been possible without cooperation from Pakistan. That said, it's a very complex relationship. Pakistan doesn't do everything that we'd like it to do in terms of combating terrorism. The president, as he said when he ordered the raid that got Osama bin Laden, in some instances, we've had to take action on our own in order to defend ourselves. But we'll be much safer, and our great preference is to work with the Pakistanis and to press them to do more to combat terrorism. So I think part of a long-term solution here is having an Afghan government that can stand on its own 2 feet and a Pakistani government that is cooperating with us to defeat the scourge of terrorism that frankly has killed far more Pakistanis than Americans in recent years because the terrorists have turned their own attacks against the Pakistani government and the Pakistani people as well. So we want to get to a place where, as the president said in his speech, we're not deploying large armies abroad. We don't have very large U.S. military footprints in these parts of the world, but rather we can bring targeted force to bear on Al-Qaeda, and we're strengthening partners like Afghanistan and Pakistan so that they can deal with the terrorism problem within their own borders, and they're fulfilling their commitments to their own people and to the international community, frankly, to not provide any safe haven for terrorism and to provide for the security of their own countries. So in general, and it's a good point to end on, as we wind down these 2 wars, reduce the number of our troops who are serving in harm's way, we can do so in a manner that allows us to protect our security, to make sure that Al-Qaeda doesn't pose that threat that it did in the past, and that allows us to take those resources that have been so dedicated to fighting these 2 wars abroad and invest them in the types of things that will create jobs at home that Brian spoke about, whether it's infrastructure, clean energy jobs, the types of things that will make sure that America is leading in the 21st century as it did in the 20th as well.
Okay, so that would conclude our chat this afternoon. Would like to thank Brian and Ben for taking the time to do this today, as well as thanking everyone involved in putting this web chat together. If you have missed any part of this conversation, please be sure to visit whitehouse.gov and you'll be able to find a video of this probably within the next hour. Again, thanks to all of you for participating, and we'll see you next time.